Useless people have no place here. The text message that was delivered to my phone stated that I had been unexpectedly allocated just prior to the presentation. It's obvious that Travis, the department manager who emailed this, has no regard for the business. Most likely, his only goal is to disparage those he doesn't like. Travis is taking advantage of this chance to humiliate and destroy me because he despises me. But I can't afford to make a mistake here and hurt the business. With determination, I collect myself and begin presenting the product using the proper terminology. I'm lucky enough to succeed, but I can't give in to Travis's demands. I had already started a particular plan. Those things I trusted to a few people would be useful soon enough. I silently continued to record information for my eventual revenge, thinking of that moment. I'm Matthew, and this year was my 33rd birthday. My favorite things are productive work and cordial connections with my coworkers. Since I was in school, I have always engaged with a lot of people because I value relationships. Speaking with individuals from various backgrounds taught me a variety of viewpoints and thought processes that have been very beneficial in my current position. I have frequently been curiously asked by close coworkers, "Matthew, why do you work so hard? Everyone else departs on schedule." I always respond to that by saying, well, it's a waste of time and stressful to pretend to be someone I'm not. It's far more enjoyable to do what I want to do. Since I was young and ignorant of the outside world at the time, I believe I could have said anything along such lines. I didn't realize that a lot of people had situations that keep them from expressing their desires. Nevertheless, I have no regrets for speaking those remarks because I met a lot of people who shared my views. I understand, Matthew. That's quite commendable. Perhaps I'll look for people who are motivated to put in more effort as well. It probably wouldn't go as planned if I said something like that now, as an adult. Things worked out well because we were young and surrounded by sympathetic individuals at the time. Matthew, I found so many people who share the same value, 5 people. That is incredible. Okay, so going forward, we will work as a team with a common goal. We discussed our values from that day on. We shared fresh ideas and taught others effective work practices, regardless of our departments or roles. Those accumulating recollections form the fundamental basis of my current identity. I currently work for a large corporation that has offices all over the world. It's a corporation that many people admire and has achieved some of the best results in the industry. People always find me surprising when I tell them I work there. But recently, I've had a bit of a problem with a particular newcomer who keeps calling me incompetent. Even small mistakes lead to long lectures, and it's been bothering me. June brought the rainy season. The gloomy weather that had lingered for so long suddenly gave way to a clear, brilliant sky stretching above us. As I stared at the bright sky and headed to work, I stepped into the sales office, only to hear Travis's shouting voice. I sighed, thinking, here we go again. Why can't you get something this simple done quickly? Everyone else manages just fine. You're unbelievably slow. That's Travis, the department manager, berating one of the colleagues. Travis is a man in his 30s who recently transferred to the sales department. Wearing an expensive suit, a luxury wristwatch, and a gleaming wedding ring, he looks like the epitome of success. His desk reflects the same image, cluttered with high-end stationery and the latest tablet devices. Even the small ornaments tucked into the corner are flashy, covered in golden embellishments that feel out of place in the office. Travis lashes out at his subordinates over the smallest annoyances. Most of all, his insults are especially sharp when results don't meet his expectations. I promised Mr. Stevens I would do a proper job as department manager. If my subordinates are incompetent, they'll just drag me down. Useless people aren't needed here. Get back to work. The colleague being scolded apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry," before quickly returning to his desk. Oh, young people like that shouldn't even bother joining this company. They'd have been better off somewhere else. Still fuming, Travis turned his attention to me as well. "Hey you Useless employee. Stop standing around and get back to work. Time is limited, you know. Yes, sir, I replied. Not wanting to endure yet another long lecture, I quietly returned to my desk. Watching the exhausted colleague, I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I walked up to the colleague and tapped them on the shoulder. Rough day, huh? This isn't much, but have it during your break. I handed him an energy bar I had stashed in my pocket and returned to my seat. It's not something to brag about, but I know most of my colleagues' preferences pretty well. After working here for over 10 years, it's only natural. That's why I always carry small snacks in my pocket to help out my colleagues in times of need. This might help for now, but it's still just a temporary fix. There are several other colleagues who've also been pushed to the edge by Travis's constant berating. This situation needs to be resolved sooner rather than later. While I was thinking about that, I didn't even notice that Travis was watching me. A notification buzzed on my phone as I continued my work. It was a text from Mr. Stevens. Puzzled, I began reading the message. Later that day, after speaking with Mr. Stevens and the useless people have no place here. The text message that was delivered to my phone stated that I had been unexpectedly allocated just prior to the presentation. It's obvious that Travis, the department manager who emailed this, has no regard for the business. Most likely, his only goal is to disparage those he doesn't like. Travis is taking advantage of this chance to humiliate and destroy me because he despises me. But I can't afford to make a mistake here and hurt the business. With determination, I collect myself and begin presenting the product using the proper terminology. I'm lucky enough to succeed, but I can't give in to Travis's demands. I had already started a particular plan. Those things I trusted to a few people would be useful soon enough. I silently continued to record information for my eventual revenge, thinking of that moment. I'm Matthew, and this year was my 33rd birthday. My favorite things are productive work and cordial connections with my coworkers. Since I was in school, I have always engaged with a lot of people because I value relationships. Speaking with individuals from various backgrounds taught me a variety of viewpoints and thought processes that have been very beneficial in my current position. I have frequently been curiously asked by close coworkers, Matthew, why do you work so hard? Everyone else departs on schedule. I always respond to that by saying, well, it's a waste of time and stressful to pretend to be someone I'm not. It's far more enjoyable to do what I want to do. Since I was young and ignorant of the outside world at the time, I believe I could have said anything along such lines. I didn't realize that a lot of people had situations that keep them from expressing their desires. Nevertheless, I have no regrets for speaking those remarks because I met a lot of people who shared my views. I understand, Matthew. That's quite commendable. Perhaps I'll look for people who are motivated to put in more effort as well. It probably wouldn't go as planned if I said something like that now, as an adult. Things worked out well because we were young and surrounded by sympathetic individuals at the time. Matthew, I found so many people who share the same value, 5 people. That is incredible. Okay, so going forward, we will work as a team with a common goal. We discussed our values from that day on. We shared fresh ideas and taught others effective work practices, regardless of our departments or roles. Those accumulating recollections form the fundamental basis of my current identity. I currently work for a large corporation that has offices all over the world. It's a corporation that many people admire and has achieved some of the best results in the industry. People always find me surprising when I tell them I work there. But recently, I've had a bit of a problem with a particular newcomer who keeps calling me incompetent. Even small mistakes lead to long lectures, and it's been bothering me. June brought the rainy season. The gloomy weather that had lingered for so long suddenly gave way to a clear, brilliant sky stretching above us. As I stared at the bright sky and headed to work, I stepped into the sales office, only to hear Travis's shouting voice. I sighed, thinking, here we go again. Why can't you get something this simple done quickly? Everyone else manages just fine. You're unbelievably slow. That's Travis, the department manager, berating one of the colleagues. Travis is a man in his 30s who recently transferred to the sales department. Wearing an expensive suit, a luxury wristwatch, and a gleaming wedding ring, he looks like the epitome of success. His desk reflects the same image, cluttered with high-end stationery and the latest tablet devices. Even the small ornaments tucked into the corner are flashy, covered in golden embellishments that feel out of place in the office. Travis lashes out at his subordinates over the smallest annoyances. Most of all, his insults are especially sharp when results don't meet his expectations. I promised Mr. Stevens I would do a proper job as department manager. If my subordinates are incompetent, they'll just drag me down. Useless people aren't needed here. Get back to work. The colleague being scolded apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry," before quickly returning to his desk. Oh, young people like that shouldn't even bother joining this company. They'd have been better off somewhere else. Still fuming, Travis turned his attention to me as well. "Hey you, useless employee. Stop standing around and get back to work. Time is limited, you know." "Yes, sir," I replied. Not wanting to endure yet another long lecture, I quietly returned to my desk. Watching the exhausted colleague, I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I walked up to the colleague and tapped them on the shoulder. "Rough day, huh? This isn't much, but have it during your break." I handed him an energy bar I had stashed in my pocket and returned to my seat. It's not something to brag about, but I know most of my colleagues' preferences pretty well. After working here for over 10 years, it's only natural. That's why I always carry small snacks in my pocket, to help out my colleagues in times of need. This might help for now, but it's still just a temporary fix. There are several other colleagues who've also been pushed to the edge by Travis's constant berating. This situation needs to be resolved sooner rather than later. While I was thinking about that, I didn't even notice that Travis was watching me. A notification buzzed on my phone as I continued my work. It was a text from Mr. Stevens. Puzzled, I began reading the message. Later that day, after speaking with Mr. Stevens in the conference room, I decided to carry a small recording device in the pocket of my suit jacket. A few days later, I discreetly kept a recorder in my chest pocket while working in another department's office. The place where I currently work is the Overseas Business Department. Several team members had gone on maternity leave around the same time, leaving the department severely understaffed. Because it wasn't a great time to hire new colleagues, they decided to bring in experienced help from other departments, me in this case. I've helped out here a few times before, so I knew I could be of some use. "Glad to have you on board. I trust you more than others, Matthew, and you're already somewhat familiar with how things work here," said Tiffany, a woman in her 30s who welcomed me warmly. "Understood. I'll be in your care for a while," I replied. Because I'd helped this team before, their reaction to me joining was fairly calm. Blending in naturally, I dove into my tasks, working hard to fill in where help was most needed. But that wasn't the only reason I was here. Actually, I'd been secretly assigned a mission by Mr. Stevens to investigate Travis's problematic behavior. I must have angered Travis somehow. When I was informed of my transfer to the Overseas Business Division, he had looked at me with a smug grin. Before moving, he'd also dumped far more grunt work on me than usual. I'm certain it wasn't just my imagination. As I sorted through documents, half occupied with these thoughts, another colleague spoke up. "Are you doing okay, Matthew? If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask." "I'm fine, really. With things as hectic as they are, any help you can give us is a huge relief. Thank you. I'll make sure to reach out if I need anything." I had only stopped working because I was lost in thought, but I still felt a little embarrassed. I needed to focus and get back to work to avoid becoming a burden to others. Almost as if she had read my mind, Tiffany spoke up. "You were just deep in thought, weren't you? How are you doing? Managing okay. Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks to your support, I'm getting by. I really appreciate it. Tiffany is a colleague my age, also in her 30s. We joined the company at the same time and have been working together as peers ever since. We understand each other well, but maintain an appropriate level of professionalism at work. Since our early days as new colleagues, we've seen a lot together, both at work and outside it. After years of sharing struggles and successes, we've come to understand each other's personalities and working styles deeply. Unfortunately, we're now in different departments. But after more than a decade at the same company, we both have a good sense of how each other's teams operate. Of course, only within the limits that do not violate confidentiality. If there's something you're unsure of, talk to Melissa or Kevin. Okay. If you need help organizing documents, Samuel is your guy. And if it's technical jargon, George knows it inside out. Perfect. Sounds like you know exactly who to go to. Tiffany clapped her hands with an amused smile on her face. You're in a good mood today. What's up? Well, remember that overseas company I've been reaching out to for ages? It looks like they're finally interested in our products. They want us to give them a presentation soon. Our company had long been trying to negotiate with a major American corporation, but talks had never quite materialized. Recently, though, it seemed like they were beginning to consider the deal, so the overseas business division was abuzz with excitement. I don't know the details, but good luck. Of course, if I need any help, I'll let you know, so be ready. I don't think there will ever be a situation where we'd need just an extra hand. I looked at Tiffany, amused yet fond, as she enthusiastically got ready. Tiffany has always been a forward thinker, unafraid to take on challenges and push boundaries. She's never concerned about department lines, and frequently proposes ideas to benefit the company as a whole. Lately, she's been advocating for developing new products aimed at overseas markets. Unlike Travis, Tiffany never looks down on people because of their age or experience. Honestly, I've often wished Travis could learn a thing or two from her. With that thought, I refocused on my work. Putting my skills to use by organizing English language materials, I returned completed files to their shelves. Ideally, everyone would put files back properly after using them. But when things get busy or when someone's distracted, mistakes happen. It's a task that needs regular attention, and for someone like me, stepping in as a temporary helper, it's the perfect job. As I concentrated, Travis suddenly entered the Overseas Business Division office. He approached Michael, the department head. I came to check on my colleague. Mind if I walk around a bit? No. Go right ahead, Michael replied. Even though Michael was older, he didn't seem to be able to stand up to Travis. I promised Mr. Stevens I'd do a proper job as department manager. If my subordinates are useless, they'll just drag me down, Travis muttered. I don't know whose words were murmured in that moment. For me, it wasn't the speaker, but what was said that caught my attention. The moment Travis showed up, murmurs of dissatisfaction started to ripple through the office. I couldn't help but overhear snippets of their comments as I worked, mentally taking notes. It's unfair. He became manager through connections, not skill. Now he's wasting time walking around other departments. I heard Michael can't stand up to him because Travis has something on him. I feel bad for anyone stuck working under that guy. I'd always felt there was something off about Travis. His rise to the position of department manager at such a young age had struck me as odd. These murmurs only confirmed my suspicions. While I mulled over these thoughts, I turned and realized, to my surprise, that Travis had gotten much closer to me than I'd expected. Grinning smugly, he walked right up to where I was sitting. Looks like you're fitting in here nicely. Sending you here as a helper was the right call, after all. Ah, is that so? I struggled to find the right words, and my face must have looked tense with nerves. But Travis, of course, misinterpreted it entirely. You seem to be struggling, so I'll have you stay here for a while. Do your best, he said. He assumed my expression was because I couldn't keep up with the work here. Even without Travis asking, I intended to work hard because I didn't want to trouble my kind and supportive colleagues. Oh, by the way, everyone here graduated from top-tier universities. Since you're from a third-tier university, you must feel out of place. But don't even think about running away, he added. Hearing those words, I felt something unsettling. A third-tier university. Where did you hear that? I asked. The other day, I saw one of your colleagues drunk at a bar and got quite a bit out of them. I get it. Having a mediocre academic background might make someone want to hide their incompetence. But keeping track of this kind of information is part of a department head's job. Don't take it personally, he replied. It was likely the alcohol talking, loose lips, and muddled memories. I hadn't actually graduated from a third-tier university, but I figured it might cause trouble if I were called a liar or something. So I decided to keep my real background hidden. I might end up being labeled as incompetent while keeping my background hidden, but since I'm working in the overseas business department now, I'm fine with that. Satisfied with my silence, Travis smirked and left the room. After that, I was assigned a certain business negotiation by Michael. It was with the major American corporation Tiffany had mentioned. Honestly, as a temporary helper, this shouldn't have fallen on me. It had Travis's fingerprints all over it. He was leveraging something as important as a future-defining deal for personal reasons, throwing me into the fire. He doesn't seem like someone suited for the position of department head. The following weeks were grueling. With the weight of the company's future on my shoulders, I couldn't afford to mess up. The stress gnawed at my stomach each night. On my way home, I grabbed energy drinks from my favorite shop just to keep going. Thankfully, my colleagues rallied around me. Tiffany especially stayed late to help me prepare, and I couldn't be more grateful. Thanks. If you hadn't helped, this would have been so much worse, I told her. Helping a friend is just what you do, but you owe me a nice meal when this is over, okay, she replied. I know. I'll treat you to the best dinner you've ever had, I promised. Then came the day of the event. At last, the fateful day arrived. With all the necessary materials in hand, Tiffany and I headed to the client's office. After giving our names at reception, we were escorted to a meeting room. The moment we walked in, a foreign colleague greeted us in English, catching me by surprise. At that moment, I realized what Travis had been planning. A confused Tiffany leaned in and spoke to me in a low voice. Wait, do we have to handle this in English? Looks like it. Guess we got no choice but to face it head on, I replied. Face it. Wait, you can do this, right? She asked with a questioning look. I decided to show her through my actions. Seeing me begin to handle the situation in English, her eyes widened in surprise. The negotiation went surprisingly well. The atmosphere was positive and encouraging. It seemed the client had intended to partner with us from the very beginning. The discussion even extended to post-deal logistics and planning. As the meeting progressed, more Japanese colleagues began trickling into the room. Clearly, the deal's importance had drawn in leaders from various departments. At this point, the discussion had become too detailed for me to handle alone. I was about to explain the situation to the newly joined Japanese colleague and suggest that we call it a day. However, it seemed the situation wasn't that simple after all. Excuse me? Isn't there a product presentation scheduled in the main conference room right after this? We'll guide you there now unless you have another engagement, someone said. Tiffany and I instinctively exchanged glances, both of us saying, Huh. Wait, I didn't hear anything about this. Is this some kind of mistake? No, it's probably Travis pulling the strings again. But since we got everything we need, it's better to handle this without making a scene, I replied. I had already committed to seeing this through, and an extra challenge wouldn't change that now. We headed to the main conference room for round 2. On the way, I received a text from Travis. The timing was so perfect, so pointed, that I couldn't help but grudgingly admire his pettiness. "Is it time for the presentation yet?" the text read. It continued with a stream of meaningless filler, but I skipped the end where it concluded, "Useless people have no place here." It was then I remembered he still believed that nonsense about my academic background. When we reached the main conference room, I stepped onto the stage that had been prepared. Taking a deep breath, I quickly organized the flow of the presentation in my mind, planning to deliver it in both Japanese and English to suit the multinational audience. "Thank you for taking the time to join us today," I said, first in Japanese, then immediately switched to fluent English. At first, I noticed some people tilting their heads in confusion at my words, and I couldn't help but nod in understanding. It seemed that everyone here had been told the product explanation would be given in English. As I continued speaking, referencing the materials and explaining the product in detail, I scanned the room. The audience appeared attentive, without any trace of hostility. Clearly, there was no one here trying to sabotage me. As I stood on stage, continuing my presentation, I noticed someone new entering the large conference room. It was Travis, who was supposed to be back at the company. Perhaps he had come to check whether his subordinates were handling the presentation properly. However, when he saw me explaining fluently, he looked visibly surprised. Before long, his face contorted with frustration, and he left the room without a word. After the presentation, Tiffany and I returned to the office. I gave my report to the Overseas Business Division and then stopped by the sales department. It felt oddly nostalgic after working in a different department for so long. As I looked around, I noticed something familiar sitting on my colleagues' desks, the small recording devices I had distributed earlier. Seeing them still there, untouched, reassured me that my plan was progressing smoothly. But Travis wasted no time. He stormed over to me with a scowl. "What the hell was that about?" "No one told me anything," he shouted. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "Don't play dumb. You were speaking fluent English at the client's company, weren't you?" I had only asked to ensure there was no mistake, but it seemed he thought I was messing with him. Travis glared at me, slamming his desk forcefully with a loud bang. "I didn't know you could speak English that well. Were you lying to us this whole time? And on top of that, I heard you introduced yourself as a graduate from a top-tier university during the negotiation." I was shocked when I heard about it from one of the client's colleagues on the way back. I never intended to lie. I had made it clear during my self-introduction to Travis from the very beginning. The day Travis became manager, all the colleagues had introduced themselves. But clearly, he hadn't been paying attention. Travis glared at me, furious. With a sudden motion, he grabbed a pen from his desk and hurled it at me. I had anticipated the move and easily sidestepped it. Undeterred, Travis began throwing more items. His pencil case, a folder, even a crumpled piece of paper. Eventually, his desk was cleared except for one item, a recording device. Seeing it, he finally seemed to regain some composure. "Fine. Let's stay calm," he said, steadying his breathing. Changing his approach, he grabbed my hand firmly and said, "Well done. You really came through this time. I'm so proud of you." From the outside, it might look like a boss showing care for his subordinate. But no one knows the truth better than I do. Travis's mouth was twitching, and more than anything, the incredible force gripping my hand said it all. It felt like I was a small animal caught in a snake's coils. Still, I had no choice but to endure it. After holding the handshake for several seconds, Travis finally let go and snorted dismissively. "Don't get cocky. I'll make sure you're out of here one way or another," he growled, his voice venomous. After taking a deep breath to calm himself, Travis turned away. "Get back to your work. I don't want to waste any more time talking to you." Of course, I felt the same way. Since I had nothing to say to Travis, I quickly left the scene. A week had passed since then. Travis continued to subject me to small acts of harassment. Most were fairly trivial. He would nag me for no reason or send me out to buy lunch for him like I was some errand boy. Thankfully, he rarely came around when I was working with other departments, so I had some peace. One day, I was carrying several sheets of paper for colleagues who preferred sketching designs on paper rather than using a computer. Tiffany, always willing to help, grabbed half the load and struck up a conversation. Now that you mention it, Travis used to pop by here all the time, but I haven't seen him around lately, she said. I thought back over the past couple of days before answering, "Yeah, you're right." I wasn't sure if Travis was finally reflecting on his actions or quietly plotting something else. The latter possibility left me uneasy. I had managed to pull off that negotiation and presentation successfully, but if I had failed, the entire company would have faced serious repercussions. Well, I can't say I miss him. But hey, you're using a different recorder today, aren't you? Tiffany asked, glancing at my chest pocket. I smiled faintly. Sharp eye. The old one's been acting up, so I sent it in for repairs. This one's a replacement. Ha! Still, why do you always carry a recorder around? Oh, well. I hesitated slightly. I couldn't exactly tell her I was using it to document Travis' behavior. It's for work. Sometimes ideas pop into my head, and it's easier to record them as voice memos. Wow, that's very you, Matthew, always so dedicated to your job. Her compliment made me think of Travis again. Travis, being Mr. Stevens' relative, lived a life of luxury. He often replaced his belongings, clothes, gadgets, and accessories, on a whim, carelessly discarding what he no longer wanted. Every time I saw him do that, I couldn't help but feel saddened for the craftsmen and manufacturers who put their effort into making those items. It was clear he'd never once thought about the people behind the products he used. Speaking of your recorder, I remember seeing you talking to Mr. Stevens about a month ago. I could have sworn you two were discussing something about recorders, Tiffany said. Oh, that. It was nothing. He was just asking for my opinion on a new product, I replied. Tiffany gave me a long, steady look before turning her gaze elsewhere. Well, if it's something you can't talk about, I won't press you. It seemed she'd had seen right through me. It wouldn't be long before I could tell her the truth, but lying to a friend still left me feeling guilty. While we were talking, it seemed the break time had arrived. Colleagues began wrapping up their work and leaving the office one after another. Some headed to the cafeteria, while others went to the convenience store, each with their own plans. Amid all this, the two of us left the company to visit a nearby ramen shop. As we walked, students passed by in front of us, perhaps finished early due to exam periods or shortened school hours. Those university days feel so nostalgic, I muttered while watching the young people. Tiffany nodded in agreement, saying, "Yeah, that's true. At 33, you start to look back on that time with nostalgia. Back then, even when we messed up, we had adults to step in and help us out. I'm so grateful for that." "You've always been a challenger," I said. Of course, I had so many things I wanted to try. I was lucky to have teachers and mentors who let me explore freely. Tiffany had attended a different university than I had, but she'd clearly made the most of her time there. I knew she participated in study abroad programs, interned at startups, and taken on countless challenges. "But I don't think Travis had the same kind of experience," she added. "What do you mean?" "The other day, I ran into him in one of the company hallways. He wasn't alone. He had this big bodyguard-looking guy with him." "Really? That's interesting." "Yeah, that man was loudly telling Travis, 'If you're going anywhere, let me know.' He spoke as if they'd known each other for years." "I see. Maybe Travis feels trapped by all that." I had only ever known Travis as the tyrant in the office. I'd never considered what his personal life might be like. But if what Tiffany said was true, living under the watchful eye of a bodyguard sounded suffocating. Maybe Travis grew up in an environment where taking risks or making mistakes wasn't allowed. With that somber thought hanging in the air, We walked in silence toward our usual ramen spot. After lunch, we returned to the office just a few minutes before the break ended, only to find my desk in complete disarray. This is awful. Who could have done this? For the time being, I asked the people who had been eating their lunch indoors what had happened, but they only turned pale and said nothing. I recognized this reaction immediately. It was the same look I'd seen on colleagues who had been screamed at by Travis. Clearly, they'd been intimidated or threatened into keeping quiet. I turned to a nearby desk where one of my colleagues was sitting and discreetly retrieved the small recorder I'd given him earlier. Tiffany noticed and tilted her head in confusion. Wait a minute. Isn't that one of those recorders you gave out? Yeah. I asked them to keep it on their desks, just in case. Just in case what? What do you mean? I explained the recorder in detail to Tiffany, who looked puzzled. After hearing that, Tiffany let out a sigh of admiration, as if it all made sense to her. Wow, so that's what those little gadgets were for. I just thought you were a recording enthusiast or something. Hey now, I do like recorders, for the record. Yeah, we can discuss your tech hobbies later. But Travis is going to lose his mind when he finds out about this. I nodded. Travis had run rampant for far too long, mistreating colleagues and abusing his authority. It was finally time to bring all of this to light. The following day, when I arrived at the office, I was immediately summoned along with Travis. The destination was the president's office. After meeting up with Travis along the way, we entered the room. The person sitting at the desk looked directly at us. The man responsible for carrying this company on his shoulders was Mr. Stevens, who also happened to be Travis's uncle. Though he was in his 50s, he maintained a youthful appearance that could easily pass for someone a generation younger. His hair was naturally streaked with gray, and he wore a simple, unadorned suit. At a glance, he might seem like an unassuming middle-aged man. However, he was the exceptional figure who had taken this company from the brink of collapse to rapid growth in just a few years. Travis, seemingly unable to understand why Mr. Stevens had summoned us, glanced around the room in confusion, his gaze wandering restlessly. Ah, sir, what is this about? Perhaps unable to endure the heavy atmosphere in the room, Travis stammered as he opened his mouth. In response, Mr. Stevens sighed and looked at Travis's face. Travis, you've let me down. Saying that, Mr. Stevens pulled out a paper bag, likely from behind his desk. Inside it was the small recorder I had distributed to my colleagues. While I had been working in the sales department, those recorders had been sitting on my colleagues' desks as mere decorations. However, the time had come for them to serve their purpose, so they were all collected at once. Why are those here? Unable to keep up with the situation, Travis turned his gaze toward me. His look seemed to ask if I knew something about this. However, I said nothing. Mr. Stevens pulled a small recorder out of the desk drawer. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary recorder. But when Mr. Stevens pressed a small button on its side, the outer casing opened, revealing another even smaller recorder inside. That's... As Travis stared in shock, Mr. Stevens began to explain. As you can see, this is a disguised recorder. Matthew used it to record your words, the countless intolerable insults you hurled. When I listened to them, I had no choice but to reflect on my own foolishness. No, Uncle. It's not like that. This is. Travis's face paled in an instant. With a trembling voice, he spoke to Mr. Stevens. However, even when faced with his panicked nephew, Mr. Stevens showed no sign of being shaken. Be quiet. I don't recall giving you permission to make excuses. At the sound of his uncle's cold voice, Travis let out a startled cry and stepped back. I believed it was my duty to honor my sister's wishes and raise her child without hardship. But it seems I made a mistake. Hearing such unexpectedly personal words, I froze, unsure of how to respond. While I had my own thoughts about Travis, I couldn't pretend to be unaffected when listening to someone's private matters. Besides, I never intended to become the kind of person who takes pleasure in someone else's misfortune. So, I simply didn't know how to react. Travis, you're fired. I gave you the position of department manager because I thought you were capable. But I was wrong. It seems I must now question everything your school records, the praise I once heard from your teachers. Everything having said that, Mr. Stevens shifted his gaze away from his nephew, Travis, and looked at me, his demeanor clearly signaling that the conversation was over. Travis, who had just been informed of his dismissal, whispered in a faint voice, "Wait, please. I'll do better from now on, so forgive me. I'm sorry, Uncle. People don't change so easily. You failed in your role as a manager, and I had no reason to give you another chance." "No. No way. Do you hate me, Uncle? Until now, you've always given me everything I asked for. That was when you were a child, but now you're an adult, and I will treat you as one." He must have realized there was no longer any room for appeal. Hearing those words, Travis clung to Mr. Stevens, sobbing uncontrollably like a child. However, Mr. Stevens said nothing to his nephew and instead turned his gaze toward me. "Well done, Matthew. Thanks to you, we avoided what could have been significant damage to this company. You also handled the recent negotiation admirably. I was right to trust you with this task." "Thank you, sir." Mr. Stevens had apparently been suspicious for some time of the high number of colleagues in the sales department taking leave. In fact, the reason I ended up working in the overseas business department was due to a secret request from Mr. Stevens. While I was still in the sales department, I received an email from him. The email detailed my transfer to the overseas business department and a certain confidential mission. Mr. Stevens, suspicious about the frequent leaves being taken in the sales department, asked me to uncover the cause. Officially, my move was framed as providing support to the understaffed overseas business department, but in reality, I was tasked with investigating Travis's behavior. That's why I used the recorder to document Travis's actions and words. Now the problem was resolved, and yet, despite everything, I felt a lingering unease, believing that things couldn't stay as they were. I gathered my courage and spoke to Mr. Stevens. "Sir, I know it's not my place, but is there really no way Travis can be given another chance?" Hearing those words, Mr. Stevens looked surprised. After checking on the still crying Travis, he turned his gaze directly to me. "You don't hold any resentment